Hello, everyone. Welcome to the not weekly recap, right? Yeah. So we are going to do a normal weekly recap this week. There's actually quite a bit going on. It's kind of funny how an entire week will go by with nothing, and there's actually quite a bit going on now. So this video is just for something big that happened at Microsoft. So Phil Spencer, who was, I guess, or is currently the head of Xbox, was promoted to Executive Vice President of Gaming.
Yes. Yeah.
So Executive Vice President of Gaming reports directly to the CEO. And so he was previously head of Xbox. Microsoft has been identifying, as they do a couple of times a year, core areas of interest, financial interest for the company. So gaming has been identified as one of the core areas of interest.
Definitely.
Which is something we've been talking about actually for a while in our videos. That Microsoft has put out numbers and they've put out pie charts as they're doing earnings that show gaming is huge. And it's as big of a portion of Microsoft as Windows.
Yeah, we said that before, and there were some people that didn't believe what we were saying, but you can. They actually have information out there on the web that you can search and you can find that shows that the Xbox division of Microsoft has grown from at one point in time it was less than 2% of their revenue.
Wow.
Now it's up there with Windows in that 9 to 11%, depending on what quarters and what years you're looking at. It's as much as 11% of their revenue. So together, Windows and Xbox are almost a quarter of their entire business. So both of those are very important. The remarkable thing about that is that nobody, I don't think 15 years ago, would have ever thought that Xbox division would match Windows at any point in time.
No. First of all, Windows is like what you always think of as Microsoft.
Yeah.
And times have changed in that sense. I think everybody knows that PlayStation is a huge division of Sony, is the big division of Sony.
Yeah, if you take Sony as the number one example of how these big, almost conglomerate or even conglomerate level businesses work, they've got lots of divisions, and PlayStation is the one holding them all up right now. Yeah. It's the only one that's really consistently making profits. Just recently, the last 3 years have been pretty good for PlayStation division, but just recently, Sony went an entire decade where only 1 year out of the 10 years ended up breaking even. They lost money 9 out of 10 years, and then if you look at the 13-year period, only one of those 13 years was profitable for Sony, and now they're making profits based off of just their gaming division alone.
Yeah.
So
which people never thought that about Microsoft. People are always talking about Xbox should be sold off and it's a really tiny part of Microsoft in there. Yeah. People have acted as crazy as to say like Amazon should buy Xbox. Yeah. Like Amazon knows something about that. So obviously it's a huge division of Microsoft. Microsoft's definitely going to keep that there. It's growing. And it's interesting because, so I will say this, and a lot of people probably don't know this. Previously, Phil Spencer was reporting to a very interesting title of person. He was reporting to an executive vice president who was the executive vice president of the Windows and Devices group, which is just a testament to the fact gaming wasn't the biggest focus. It
wasn't very important to them.
So they just tossed it under whatever.
Under Windows, which made no sense,
which
really.
makes no sense. So that person, if I understand correctly, has just moved over. And they've essentially added somebody to the executive team and possibly taken off another category of the executive team. And this realignment was to put executives in place that are in the areas that are core interest areas for profit in the company.
Yeah.
So I think, for you and I, especially given our backgrounds and our current situations, this raised a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of really amazing things that might come out of this because of the way that this structuring works, which we'll go into in a bit. But I think the biggest question that we ended up with is, does this mean that, Phil Spencer just moves up and he continues doing the same thing he was doing, except now he has executive leadership? We'll talk more about what executive leadership is.
Yeah.
Or does this mean we have to get a new head of Xbox to work underneath Phil Spencer? And considering that it's the executive vice president of gaming, we know there's been a huge focus on Windows gaming, adding PC gaming into what they're doing. So essentially that would mean that Phil Spencer's over both of those.
Yeah.
So does that mean then that they're going to have a head of Xbox and a head of Windows gaming? Neither. one or the other.
Well, we see that happen in a lot of corporate companies these days, where both things can occur. So, and in a certain type of company, we've seen this happen, they will dump more responsibility on somebody, call it a promotion, and then not fill...
executive name, and then just give them a lot to do.
Yeah, and then not fill the position that used to exist, which would be underneath that.
Right.
And then the other times you've seen other companies, promote somebody. It's a full-on promotion. They do have more responsibility now.
But it's different.
But they have that position still open, and then somebody else takes the position.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see which direction
ends up happening.
This company goes, Microsoft goes,
yeah.
On this particular thing. I think a lot of people are hoping that somebody does take the position of head of Xbox underneath now Phil Spencer. Right. That'll be interesting to see if that happens. But he may have more sway and more power if they don't do that and they keep him as sort of doing both roles, essentially.
Yeah, it'll be really interesting to see. Mm-hmm. And I think the big question, which leads to the other big question, is let's say that they do take on another head of Xbox. Mm-hmm. Who is that person?
Yeah.
And do they help or do they hinder the progress of Xbox, which is always a risk, which, people have gotten used to the idea of Phil Spencer being in charge. Mm-hmm. Not everybody likes what he's doing, which is true of every head of Xbox ever in history, every head of everything ever in history.
Definitely.
But if you get another one underneath him, they could drive him to do really good things, or they could hold him back.
Yeah.
And that's a risk that, you know what you're getting with Phil Spencer, kinda.
Yeah. So if you get somebody who's more aggressive and kind of a shark in some ways,
that would be good.
Someone who's a salesman, someone that can hustle both the people that are above them and the people that are below them. That would be a very good thing for...
That's what gaming needs. That's what Microsoft gaming needs.
Yeah, we've been in corporate America previously, in multiple situations. Both of us have been with multiple different companies.
Yeah.
And, we've seen what that looks like, and we know what, like the truly good hustlers and truly good salesmen do. Yeah. They can convince everybody around them to do their bidding and do what they want to do.
Yeah.
And then the people that don't have that ability, well, they end up getting usually pushed around by those that do. So we kind of do need, in all the gaming companies, they all kind of need somebody that can really go after things and get things done for essentially the consumers, the gamers at the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because, obviously most people would say that Phil Spencer is not that aggressive personality.
He doesn't seem to be now.
He doesn't seem to be anyway.
Yeah.
And something that we've learned is every position, I don't care what executive role you're in, requires talking and selling and being good at convincing the person that this is the budget you should get, or this is how the budget should get spent, or, this is what you should allow me to do.
I've done that a million times. I need more marketing, yes.
I need more freedom was one of my favorites.
Yeah.
I need more space here to do something.
Yeah, we were always referred to as rogues in our individual fields, which is considered a bad thing, I think, in corporate America, but we always considered that the biggest compliment.
That's the people who get things done.
Yeah, you could give somebody. So Microsoft needs a rogue.
They need a rogue
in that position, in that situation. And now that Phil is in this promoted position, he may be able to take on that role himself. This may light a sort of a fire or a spark in him that makes him a little more aggressive and says, "Give me more. If you want to see this go from, what minuscule percentages it was previously to 11, and you want to see that doubled, you want to see this become a quarter of Microsoft's overall business?
Right.
Give me a little bit more and I'll show you what I can do." That'd be really nice to see.
That would be really nice to see. Now, of course, the secondary question to, let's say he can do the talking. Mm-hmm. And let's say he gets that fire, he gets that person underneath him, and we get more aggressive. Is he going to be aggressive with the right initiatives?
That's the other question about Phil Spencer that you hear from pretty much everybody that pays attention to what Xbox division has been putting out over the last few years.
E3 this year in particular.
E3 this year, definitely. You and I were a little bit more critical of Microsoft and the E3 in our post-E3 video. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people have been critical every single year this generation. And really, if you go back... Yeah, and if you go back, it goes back to around 2010 when they started the Kinect initiative. A lot of people didn't like motion gaming. A lot of people weren't on the bandwagon for Wii. Yeah. I was one of those individuals that was pretty anti-Wii, pretty anti-Nintendo. For the first time in my life, after having been a huge Nintendo fan, I said, this is not for me on the Wii.
Yeah.
On the Kinect, I actually warmed up to it a little bit. I was one of more of those people. I saw what they were doing there. It made sense at the time. Yeah. Now we know that it wasn't the best route to pursue, but it seemed like a really good thing at the time. And so people have been very critical of the types of games that Microsoft have put out ever since that happened. And really, to be honest, we've got to call it what it is. They have put a lot more kiddie games out. They have put a lot more cartoony looking games out.
It was like the year of cell shading.
It was at E3 this year, definitely. Yeah. We have these powerful systems out, the PS4 Pro, that can do some things that even average PCs can't do. We have this new X console coming out that's, if you look at the articles that have come out on what Forza's running, you need an Intel i7, you need a GTX 1080, and it's still, even with that powerful of a rig, doesn't match what the X can do on Forza 7.
Right.
That's pretty impressive. So if you have that type of hardware, the Pro, the X, why aren't we getting more realistic, more gritty, more mature adult games? Since the adult
that showcase that vision.
Yeah, well, since the average gamer is now a lot older than they used to be, they're not in their 20s anymore.
Yeah, particularly Microsoft. Microsoft's got an older client base.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's it's interesting to see kind of that E3 this year. I feel like it showcased Phil Spencer exactly.
Yes, that's what a lot of people say.
Yeah.
We don't know if that's true because he's only one person.
Yeah.
It could be a
There's
number
lots
of
of people that
things.
make decisions.
Yeah.
But the things that he has commented in interviews that he likes
seem to be those types of games.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then the really big question, probably the most important question becomes, can he ask for the right things? Does he put the money in the right places? Because if he doesn't, do we want him to be really good at that talking? Yeah. Or do we want him to be held back a little bit?
Yeah.
Because we don't want that money to ultimately take Microsoft in the wrong direction.
Yeah, we're not being critical of the games that have been promoted, the super Lucky Tales type games.
Those are good. They have
Those are good. They need to have that as well.
But there was a lot of that.
Yeah, and you can really only do one of those, I think, per platform, really, to be successful. Yeah. Once you start flooding the market with the similar types of games, we've seen this in shooters recently, Lawbreakers, all the information that came out about that recently.
Yep.
And not just that title, a bunch of shooter games are failing right now because people kind of back one or two of the big horses, and then everybody else falls by the wayside. Yep. So maybe a little bit less of the kiddie-looking type games, the cel-shaded type games, the the interesting art style that people always go with mid-generation, and maybe a little bit more of mature rated games.
Yeah.
Rated R movies are doing very well for Hollywood right now.
Absolutely.
Breaking records left and right. Every year now we're seeing.
Yeah.
So this is what people want.
And it's for the same reason. It's the graphics. Yeah. The game that we play the most by far is Gears.
Yeah.
Gears is so ridiculously realistic at this point, and this is without the X.
Yeah.
That you feel like these are actual humans that you're looking at. It looks like a movie.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's the kind of graphics, Gears, Forza, that really showcase that. Halo.
Yeah.
Halo is a little bit more, it's not animated, but it's a little bit more
Uncharted
fantasy-oriented. Uncharted, the Tomb Raider. Tomb Raider looks really good. So if you think about those are the kinds of things that would showcase what the X does. Yeah. So you have a hardware team that was working on the X.
Yeah.
And then you have a software team that was working on the software, and they almost don't match up in some arenas. So something that I think is an important discussion, because I haven't heard this discussion yet, is what is an executive vice president? So, both of us have a background in being pretty high up in companies and dealing with executive teams a fair amount. At this point, I own a company. We've referenced that in a previous video as well. So for me, and probably for you, it raised a lot of interesting thoughts and a lot of interesting questions. So this actually connects back to something very important that not as many people noticed. At the beginning of the year, they promoted 2 people at Microsoft to corporate vice president. Mm-hmm. Now, you can predict that they had a full assessment of what was coming because Phil Spencer was not one of them.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Which was really weird. 2 CVPs, and it was Mike Ibarra, head of platform engineering. So that's like the interface on the Xbox. And then Kareem Chowdhury, who does the software. Basically, the head of the team that created the Xbox One X.
Yeah.
So they went up to corporate vice president. That was enough of a sign that they're putting emphasis in gaming.
A lot of emphasis in gaming and Xbox in particular.
So that was really interesting. Corporate vice presidents have a lot more pull. No matter what their previous title was, they're on the CVP team. They have a lot more ownership in the company, and they're in some of the roundtable discussions for where things should go. But they ultimately still report to a head of something. So Mike Ibarra and Kareem Chowdhury both still reported to Phil Spencer.
Yeah.
And then now Phil Spencer's on the executive team, and it makes more sense for CVPs to report to EVPs.
Yeah.
So that's probably a good step in the right direction and may be indicative of not replacing that head of Xbox role.
Yeah.
But it was interesting that Phil Spencer didn't get that. So they knew for a while, reorganizations take time. Microsoft is a publicly traded company. You can't just move people constantly. Yes. So they had to make that decision. They had to show that decision worked, and then they can move somebody to the executive team because a lot of analysts question movements in executive team. However, Phil Spencer moved up to executive vice president.
Yeah, moving him to the SLT, the senior leadership team, is a really good thing, I think, for gamers and consumers ultimately, because what this means is everyone knows that he's very interactive with the community. He's always talking, he's always answering questions. Occasionally he answers some of the people that seem to be hating, which is kind of interesting, but maybe he doesn't have the ability to discern that, or maybe he does discern it and then does it anyway because he's trying to garner more of a following from people that don't like Xbox. So it could be that. But this is ultimately a good thing because of his interaction level. Him, Mike Ibarra, we talked about this a lot of times, a lot of them on Twitter and social media.
Yeah.
Now it's up to the consumers, the gamers, you can really actually tweet at him now and say, this is what we want. Absolutely. We want more of this type of game. We want more. If you guys think there's not enough first-party big budget titles, we've talked about that. We said that we're happy with what we've got there. But a lot of people say there's not enough of that. Apparently, they have the time to play 15 of those a year. And if you have that time, then yes, tweet at Phil now and ask him for those types of things.
Because you're tweeting at an executive vice president. And so an executive vice president has a tremendous amount of pull, way more than people understand and realize. The executive team in a company directly advises the CEO. So everybody keeps talking about it as, whoa, he reports directly to the CEO now. That is true. But what people don't realize is the CEO is not an expert in the categories of the executive vice presidents. That's not his job. He's an expert in business.
Yeah.
So each of those executive vice presidents is deferred to in their role as being the expert of their role.
Yeah, absolutely.
So money is allocated to the different roles that have EVPs. Those EVPs are in the roundtable discussions. They are part of the big company moving decisions. They're often part of the board of directors that direct essentially the publicly traded aspect of the company. They have a lot of pull. So the CEO and the EVP of gaming will have conversations back and forth about what to do with monies and budgets and different things that they want to discuss moving the gaming direction. It's not going to be like the CEO tells him, here's what you need, and then he has to convince him otherwise. It's more of a conversation. Here's what I'm thinking, but what are you thinking? Because you're the expert in this.
Most corporate companies do work that way. Yeah.
Yeah. So the executive team advises the CEO, and the CEO makes final calls. So yes, the CEO is ultimately in charge, but they use their executive team constantly to make their decisions. They can't make those decisions on their own. That's not what they're there to do. So he will be involved in the conversations that are at the highest possible level of the company, and they're conversations, not directives. So I don't think of it as much as reporting to the CEO. I picture like a candid conversation happening often.
Definitely.
And again, it's got to be the right conversation.
Yes.
Because he will end up in those conversations. He will have direct opportunities to really chat with the CEO about the gaming division and where the gaming division goes.
Definitely.
It's also an asset that they promoted the two people that they did to CVP because they've got some direction and some ownership, and we know that the people that they put on the CVP panel are also really good in the direction of where Microsoft's gaming division's headed.
Well, there's also another side effect that this could potentially have, and that's that the thing that a lot of us want to see is we kind of want to see a separation from the Windows thing. Like over the last few E3s, they've talked about Windows Play Anywhere or Xbox Play Anywhere, or a lot of those things being kind of combined and making them sort of one and the same thing. Some people really love that out there if you read a lot of comments. Some people are really into this idea of PC gaming and console gaming becoming the same thing and everything is shared and everything is crossplay. And then some people really like the idea of there being different platforms, understanding why that's good for competitiveness in the market, and then understanding that sometimes when you blend certain things, they actually don't lend themselves to more sales. They can actually hurt Not having exclusives. Say every game went multi-platform on every platform. Well, eventually, some of the platforms would shut down because somebody else is going to have the majority of the sales in the hardware. So there really only needs to be one hardware since everything's on everything. Exactly. That's not good for competitiveness. Ultimately, that company that beats the other two companies gets to make all the,
because they're the big company.
They get to make all the decisions now, and gamers just have to deal with it. Yeah. So that wouldn't be good.
You want competition. You want PlayStation, and you want Microsoft, and you want Nintendo, and you want them
and you want PC
at each other's throats, trying to outdo each other.
Definitely.
And you want PC. Yeah. Because PC is its own side of the industry completely. That's like a totally different game in both.
We talk about it in NPD all the time. It's completely different.
It's completely different. Their revenue's completely different. Yeah. Everything's completely different. So and again, Phil Spencer, we know he's the main supporter of the initiative of not withholding things.
It seemed that way, but yeah.
Yeah. So hopefully it did seem that way, and that's not exactly how it is. But if I were to guess, and I totally hope I'm wrong here, I would guess that Phil Spencer would drive, if he is in charge of both, he would drive just a complete merging of the two. And that is
are you saying of Windows and Xbox?
Of Windows and Xbox games.
See, I want the opposite
Play Anywhere
of that.
is a big initiative for him. I do too. I totally don't want that to happen. So I hope that either I'm misinterpreting Phil Spencer's initiative there, or that there's something in place that causes that not to happen.
See, it could have been one of two things. It could have been Phil trying to convince other people to go that direction, or it could have been other people in the organization, maybe even the CEO, trying to convince Phil that Windows and Xbox should be one thing. Yeah. I personally not a big fan of that. I like exclusives on all the platforms because I buy every platform, every generation, and pretty much without with the exception of the Wii. That's the one thing I never bought. But I like seeing that. I'm not a huge fan of crossplay. I'm not a huge fan of Play Anywhere, even though it is beneficial for some people. Doesn't benefit me. Doesn't benefit you. It
doesn't benefit the industry as a whole.
Yes, yeah. Not so much. There are some instances where you can make an argument for it. Yeah. But just saying completely ubiquitously, no.
That's just what it all is.
Yeah. So I like seeing some of these things a little bit separate. Not a big fan of the idea of keyboard and mouse, especially when it comes to competitive games on the platform.
I think we're both still on the side of how are you going to make that perfectly fair.
Yeah, and you really can't without creating division. The thing they're trying to get rid of, they're trying to break down these walls and these barriers. We keep seeing these tweets. You keep seeing all these people promote that idea. The same thing that you're trying to do to promote unity is going to create more division because people are going to get turned off by that. Yep. They don't want to think that somebody else has an unfair advantage. They don't want to think that someone else is cheating.
True. Yeah.
So, yeah.
It would be really unfortunate to see more merging. I get the Play Anywhere, and I think that works for certain things.
Certain people like it.
Fallout Shelter on my PC in between.
So you did it one time.
I have to do. No, not one time. I did it for a few weeks, and then I got tired of it. But there's games like that it's like, all right, you're not taking that away from console if you put it on console first and then you put it on Play.
Minecraft. There's things like Minecraft that lend themselves well.
Minecraft is perfect for that.
That's exactly to crossplay with people on the Switch. That makes perfect sense.
That makes perfect sense.
You have a lot of
kids are on the Switch.
Yes, you have kids on the Switch, and they want to have a bigger pool of people to play with. Yeah. So it makes sense to combine it with Xbox Live or PlayStation Network. Yeah. Definitely. Not a lot of games like Minecraft. Not a ton.
Yeah. No. So those games need to continue being that way, and that I do think Phil Spencer's very good at making that happen. I think he spearheaded that. But I do hope that it doesn't create a giant blending, which hopefully, maybe having a head of Xbox and a head of Windows gaming would be good in that sense. But I hope that they do find a way to continue doing that, because ultimately, if everything that you have on Xbox you can have on PC, you kind of eliminate some of the glamour that people go for, where this is only on Xbox and this is only, I only play with Xbox people. And then, where does that stop? Does it start merging in with PlayStation? We start cross-playing everything? Yeah. Does it start merging in with Nintendo? And then they're not competing. So if you're not competing with the other platforms, you're not going higher and higher.
If you don't have competitive advantages, then there's no reason for anyone to purchase your platform.
Nobody cares.
If there's no reason for anyone to purchase your platform, there's no reason for anyone to subscribe to your service. If nobody is subscribing to your service,
you're done.
Your revenue, your profits are going to tank.
Yeah.
That's where everyone's going, is services.
That would be what would close the gaming division of a company.
That could even cause a crash, like what we've seen happen before. Yeah. We've seen it in a lot of industries, and it happened to video games before. So let's keep everything competitive as possible.
Yes, even Microsoft competing within themselves between their Windows and their
Windows and Xbox.
That's a good thing to add with Phil Spence.
Imagine if they could have more competition between those two divisions, and they get two very motivated teams
that are
pushing
with each other
for innovation.
Yeah.
That's a good thing.
Trying to out-innovate each other, which is ultimately what PlayStation versus Xbox is. Mm-hmm. They're sitting there constantly out-innovating each other.
Absolutely.
And everybody thinks it's bad, and there's this big war.
It's not bad.
It's a really good thing for any platform you're on.
You know who benefits?
Us.
The gamers. Yes,
yeah, it's a huge benefit. If people don't compete, if they don't, it's like people say, if you don't fear for your job, you're not a good employee. Mm-hmm. So if you don't compete, you don't really do anything. You're just kind of like, whatever. Yeah. That's cool.
Doesn't matter.
And that, I hope that they move an initiative forward to keep competing, not just with PlayStation, but with themselves, with Nintendo.
Absolutely.
And keep being what the Xbox One X is, because that's what the Xbox One X is. That's the statement that console makes.
Yeah, the team that worked on the X and the S, they need to see what the Surface team is doing and be jealous of that and then want to outdo them, essentially. And then the Surface team needs to see the X and go, wow, all right, that's a lot of power.
That's where we're
What can we do in the next Surface product?
Yeah, that would be amazing, because I have both, too. So that would be really amazing if they would compete with each other.
Yeah, you're a big Surface fan. You got one right there.
I'm a big Surface fan. This is like my favorite thing in the whole world. Mm. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I'm sure that we'll report a lot more on this. As with many things, it's a continuing conversation, I'm sure. But that was the news that just came out, I guess, yesterday. So that's what we know at the moment. We will do a weekly recap video soon.
Definitely. There was a lot of topics, so a lot more to discuss.
A lot of things got cut, so
another thing that we wanted to announce, though, is that we're going to start doing ongoing conversations rather than feeling like we covered one topic and then never ever being able to go back and talk about it again because you're repetitive at that point. Yeah. So instead, everything's just going to be sort of an ongoing conversation. Yeah. I think that works a little bit better for doing more videos in the future.
Definitely. So this is definitely in one of the categories that would be a continuing conversation, as there are a couple of things that we're going to do in our recap. So if you like this video, give us a like. If you haven't subscribed and turned the bell on, please do. You'll get instant notifications when we do drop these videos. Hopefully more content coming soon, especially with continuing some of these conversations that we've had. Definitely. And then watch for our weekly recap toward the end of the week when we usually drop the weekly recap. Thanks for watching.